Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Two Tokens studio. Today we have the pleasure of recording an interview with Marley Gray, Principal Architect at Microsoft and also leading figure in the InterWork Alliance. I'm joined here by my colleague Mark van Rijmenam. We're both advisors in the Two Tokens Foundation, which is the ecosystem that we're working for. My background is co-founder, business director at Dusk Network, financial sector blockchain, and my colleague Mark's background is...
Well, thank you very much, Jelle. My name is indeed Mark van Rijmenam. I'm the founder of Dataflock and the founder of Maven, where we fight misinformation with a tokenized ecosystem, and part of the project team from Two Tokens. It's a pleasure to be here, and with us on the show is indeed Marley Gray. Welcome, Marley.
Thank you.
Can you please share us a bit of a background of yourself?
Sure. So, Marley Gray, I'm principal architect at Microsoft in our multi-party engineering team, which is an evolution of what we used to call the blockchain engineering team, which is still around, but we're looking at higher level sort of use cases, not just at the technology, but how we solve real world business problems. And along that path, tokenization being sort of the fundamental building block, when we look at multi-party systems of how organizations agree on establishing value to exchange with each other is a critical step. Last year we formed the Token Taxonomy Initiative, which is sort of a very small step in that, from some work that we had done on my team called the Token Taxonomy Framework. And we contributed that and sort of said that this is a good idea, a good starting point. Let's run with that. And over the last year, we have worked with the larger, broader open community to evolve the Token Taxonomy Framework to where it is today. And now it's sort of anchoring this larger initiative, which we call the InterWork Alliance. So that's sort of who I am and the journey that got me here.
Well, that's great to hear. And so, yesterday or so, or this week, the InterWork Alliance was launched. Indeed, we've read the press release with a very large body of companies supporting you. So that's great. Congratulations on the launch of that.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit more about what's the goal and the importance of the IWA and what you're trying to achieve with it?
IWA is really focused on a couple of things. Primarily, it's around this this new category of applications, which generally we're calling multi-party. Sort of the industry is landing on this term, and it is this. It used to be just blockchain. Now it's much larger, right? It's a larger sort of vision that we have. Not just looking at transactional workloads of doing traditional value transfers and things like that, but now we're looking at broader workloads around analytical workloads. So how do we address multi-party AI, for example? What does it mean? How can we really get to a shared and collaborative type of economy, which this multi-party scenarios sort of aim to go at? So what we wanted to do was to, rather than focus on the technology and try to get technologies to interoperate with each other, what we really needed to do is step back and get a clear understanding and a clear set of definitions of what the businesses are trying to do and how can we capture that in a consistent way. Because when we talk about multiple parties working together, they have to basically agree on the fundamental building blocks of mediums of exchange, the tokens, and the values of those. A contractual framework, not defining all the contracts that can be there. There's endless or infinite numbers or combinations of contracts, but we should have a framework that multiple parties can come to the table, like most legal jurisdictions have, and have some foresight over time of when you start to execute these transactions and these contracts, how you can reason over the historical aspect of that. So with that, we sort of scoped out the InterWork Alliance and to say, if we can build a set of tools or frameworks that let us address the tokenization, a contract framework or an InterWork framework that sits on top of that, and then an analytical framework that can sit on top of that, sort of conceptually, as the InterWork Alliance sort of infrastructure. Those are not the standards we're defining, but those are just the tools that let people define standards in the same way, so that we're not all sort of capturing requirements and what the business processes are in different formats and flavors. We can use the same framework in a collaborative way.
Yeah.
So the end result is really to get these business standards using these common tools rather than the tools themselves.
So if I understand it correctly, you make a differentiation between tokens on the one hand and blockchain on the other hand. If I understand it correctly, a token from the IWA perspective does not necessarily have to be on a blockchain. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're completely agnostic. We make lots of allusions to some sort of multi-party medium where you're going to have, but there's never going to be one, right? You're going to have multiple types of formats, and whether it's a blockchain or a distributed ledger or a centralized database,
Yeah.
we're not going to prescribe that. Rather, the business requirements should drive what that decision is, not just the technology.
Of course, you also have the ISO subcommittees that are working on standards. IWA also tries to do standards. How are you different from the ISO, and how are you aligned?
We like to align with the existing standards bodies. If you start looking at the ISO and you read ISO standards, and they're really not focused on specific use cases, right? What I like to say that we'll produce in the InterWork Alliance is sort of a layman's, not really a layman. It's created by the subject matter expert. So we look at and using the common framework that people understand a specific business. They have no understanding of, or need no understanding of, underlying blockchains or even IT, right? But understand these are what the business. This is how we need to do business. This is how we need to work together. These are the regulatory constraints that we have, and define that in clear ways that anyone else approaching this from the business perspective could read those standards and understand exactly what they are, and not have to go into and look up an appendix to look up different acronyms and look at weird, syntax for navigating through massive reams of documentation. The concept here is to link the business requirements that we're capturing in a common way for multi-party scenarios in the InterWork Alliance, to link to both implementation frameworks or implementation platforms, other regulatory frameworks that are more focused on specific aspects. So you might have in a broad use case, you might have one aspect that really focused on a particular set of, or needs a particular set of communication protocol, for example, or something like that. It would point to that. So we will refer to that and reuse that. We don't want to reinvent the wheel.
So it's very much methodology and not necessarily a collective kind of prescription of business logic.
Right.
Yeah, clear. And do you see, so one of the things that we see, for example, also here locally, right, we've built our own framework that originated for the Netherlands, and that's now being used in the wider EU, is that there's always an element of having to sacrifice granularity or generalizability or accuracy for generalizability, I should say. What kind of things did you run into in developing the frameworks?
Yeah, one of the things that we did run into is even though we're having common terms and definitions and things like that, for certain, I'll use the insurance industry, for example. We have this concept of something called insurable, or it's a behavior. And what we wanted to be able to do is have multiple versions of that behavior, because there will be different aspects of different types of insurance. Will have different, ways they're going to implement, or different data elements they want to record in that behavior. So we can have the same name, but with different versions. So with versioning, we'll be able to support sort of the differences and try to not get to the least common denominator standard, which is not really practice. I mean, it's good for understanding things, but it sort of falls down. We wanted to define that. Where's that middle ground where we're not writing the highly detailed technical specification or standard, but we're also allowing these business requirements to get fairly granular. Using these frameworks without dictating implementation.
And in your recollection, was there enough business requirements, or was there a large enough variety of business requirements to effectively framework from? We see a lot of businesses still. Some are definitely trailblazing the space, so to say. There's also a large chunk of businesses who want to get into blockchain or multi-party computation, yet do not have an extremely firm grasp on use case or on implementation or on requirements. How were you able to allow for that kind of a large majority of businesses, I would say, to still be represented in a framework without having actual input to it?
Yeah, the first thing was just to try to simplify and use analogies for people to get over the technical or the crypto barrier. We in the industry early on in blockchain, we very much put up these technical
Barricades.
crypto punk speak, and it was very intimidating for business people to come in, and they thought it was all about cryptocurrencies, and it didn't need to be like that. So actually, the TTF started out as an educational tool, just to because we had business people coming to us and said, "What's this?" Either they were wholly dismissing tokenization or blockchain because of this, because it got a bad rap, or they felt they couldn't understand it because they would get hung up on consensus algorithms and all kinds of stuff. It was like, no, that's not the important bit. For a business person, this is real value. This is how you can either make a lot of money, save a lot of money, or change the world, or all three.
Do you think it's relevant at this point in the industry to include the majority already, or should we focus on working on standards like this with the subject matter experts and first move that part of the industry to proven value before including the rest?
Well, I don't think we can. We can talk about greenfield, but we'll never have a greenfield. I think in reality, we're going to have, we already have a lot of projects and frameworks in certain areas that are already well down the road and getting fairly mature. What we actually did on the TTF was to take some of those and reverse engineer them to validate the frameworks, to say, hey, yes, the decomposition of these things into the TTF makes sense. So we can go both directions. And that was actually quite valuable. We did a lot of that in the Ethereum community, for example. And the EEA as our initial host was a great place to sort of incubate the InterWork Alliance. But now that we're sort of agnostic, I think this is really going to unlock a much broader ecosystem. And a lot of the standards work happens, and this is the interesting bit that's makes InterWork Alliance very unique. You have a lot of standards organizations that work in a specific industry, like banking or capital markets or insurance. But in reality, when we look at everything as a supply chain, when you talk about multi-party, you're talking about dealing with people. If your supply chain is in one vertical, you're not doing business, right? You're not, and that's not really a supply chain. It's not reality. Reality is your supply chain is your business, and then your supply chain is made up of other verticals and other segments within other verticals. And you need a way to be able to have those organizations define things in a common way so that you can compose into working across insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, supply chain, banking. All of them have to sort of be able to plug in to meet the business requirements if we're going to ever get to this tokenized economy where we have this driving automations like that. We have to have a framework like this that spans those vertical sort of silo. I don't want to call them silos. It's very useful within the industries that they serve, but ultimately we're trying to sell to other people. And financial services are actually, I want to be able to sell insurance, define my insurance connectivity into this tokenized economy once and sell it 1 million times, right?
Yeah,
is the idea.
So you've launched with 36 companies. How many of these companies have experimented with the token taxonomy framework, and what has been their response?
Well, we have, initially the response for the token taxonomy framework was very good. Initially, it was kind of rough because the tooling wasn't quite there. But when we sort of removed the tooling and the framework itself and went into like whiteboarding, traditional get business people in a room and whiteboard and take things and then take it offline and put it into the framework. Now you'll see in the InterWork Alliance, we have these visual tools where you can drag and drop and a business person can actually model out a scenario using a token. It's going to be, when we've shown that to people and they've taken a look at it, it's sort of an eye-popping, wow, I didn't realize you could do this. And that helps me understand and also model the business out more effectively. And once we span that across, and you can see how tokens and contracts interoperate and interrelate to each other in a composable way, and then analytics on the back end is going to be really, really powerful. So, conceptually people learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a very good learning and getting people to talk and have common terms and definitions. So people are speaking the same language in both business and technology.
Yeah.
Now the tools are really sort of going to really accelerate, and that's what we're looking forward to. And the early sign-ons will say, "Hey, this is very promising. Let's invest here."
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. But so these tools that you've developed, are they only for the large corporates, or the smaller company can also the SME can also use them and sort of tokenize their business? Is that the idea as well, or are you focused on the large multinational organizations?
Yeah, so there's a couple of aspects. One is we're trying to bootstrap an ecosystem. So the base token taxonomy framework it doesn't have a front end, right? There's no tooling front end. It's all sort of back end service and a data model, and it's persisted. And so we have some basic tools that we showed. So we're encouraging smaller startups to have interesting ideas for either modeling or doing code gen or doing whatever, to use that framework and tap into it and extend it. And that's where the visual tools have come in. So the Neo Global had the visual tool they've built, and you'll be seeing videos of that coming out. We have other partners that are coming out and contributing there. But we're going to make the TTF and these tools will be publicly available, so they're good for like learning, and anyone can go learn and use the tools and do them. Members will be able to make contributions and actually get certified to the frameworks themselves. So we're actually really driving towards making the tools both not just from the IWA and its members, but open up to a broader community to get innovation stirred up there, but also make it widely used and as an education tool, and spread it out and have as many people use the same tools as possible.
And one of the things that excites us, Marley, is that as you know, Two Tokens is a framework organization here in the EU, and obviously a launching partner as well of the InterWork Alliance. We're currently in a phase where we're bringing a lot of our R&D to life. So we're working on 3 use cases. I think you're roughly familiar with them. One is electronic bills of lading. The second one is kind of alternative finance, tokenized funds conceptually. And the final one, the one that Mark and myself are most active on, is the tokenization of the Two Tokens Foundation, right? So we're kind of tokenizing the ecosystem and allowing for inclusion of its members and kind of bootstrapping that environment. We've used the TTF and also the budding IWA frameworks in these processes. So we're actually next week at a large Dutch blockchain conference reporting out on the findings of our own use case, the utility token for the community. And one of the big umbrellas that we're kind of using to talk to is the TTF, the IWA. Is it exciting to see that kind of traction abroad, and is that how we should be using it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's probably one of the more exciting, especially the e-bill of lading is one that I've been talking about for about a year and saying somebody really needs to do this. This is the industry's screaming for this, and the leadership when you guys told me about the work that you were doing there, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Can you drive this in through the TTF and tell us where there are holes and if you're missing something? And it's the frameworks aren't done, right? So as we drive these, when you guys go through and you use the tools and go, hey, we're trying to see a bill of lading, we're missing X. Can we add X to this? We're like, yes, thank you. Add it in there, and we'll make things better. Because when you find that, it's gonna make somebody else coming through, that their path will be easier from the trails that you blazed. So we're really, really excited about the participation. Two Tokens, but also broadly, we're seeing it across multiple industries and getting a lot of interest in places where we hadn't seen it before.
Wonderful. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for explaining about the IWA. It was good to highlight the frameworks and the work that went into it, and obviously, hopefully, many fruits yet to bear for the Two Tokens and IWA collaboration. Thanks, Mark, for joining me in this interview, and obviously, thank you, Marley, for making the time to also talk to our community here.
Thank you. Thanks for everything that Two Tokens is doing to help with the InterWork Alliance. I'm really looking forward to progress you guys are making.
Awesome. Absolute pleasure. My name is Jelle Pol. Please keep in touch at twotokens.org, where you can find many more of these recordings.